Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the latest edition of Free Thought Hour, the show where we have a co-host, and that's Tercia, who's going to help me do the talking, and a guest. So we have a lovely person today from South Africa. Tercia scooped him up with her fishing rod, and I've already mistaken him for another friend of hers. He's not the one with the vineyard. So apologies for that. If you're expecting the man who I've said goes from the Bible to Bacchus, it's not him. Bad boy. Anyway, say hello to Tercia. How the devil are you?
I'm very well, thank you, John. Our cricket team has beaten Sri Lanka soundly, and our rugby team is still in the running for the World Cup. But I'm just curious, you have a lovely person from South Africa, and then you mentioned our guest. So am I not a lovely person from South Africa?
I'm afraid you are part of the furniture now. So you're not a lovely person from South Africa. You're the eye candy of the show. So there you go.
And I've told you that is terrible. That is just sad. But let's not go. I'm very happy to have our guest, Isak Spangenberg. I just have to say, Sakkie is short for Isak, which is the Afrikaans version of Isaac. So,
yes. Would you like to introduce him?
Yes, I would very much like to.
Here we go.
So I got to know Professor Isak Spangenberg. Sakkie, I'm introducing you. When I was still very much religious and in the Gereformeerde Kerk, the Reformed Church, the Protestant Reformed Church, we actually had a camp, a church camp one weekend, and we were explicitly warned against the likes of Professor Isak Spangenberg because you were part of a group that started a movement in theology in South Africa. And I'm very privileged to introduce you to our listeners, watchers, hopefully readers, because you have published at least 10 books. You've written numerous articles. You have been in the newspapers. And hello, Adele, Bieneke, lekker om jou hier te hê. And John, please forgive me. This is again a takeover of the colonized peoples. So if I jump into Afrikaans, I won't say anything nasty or bad about you. Sakkie, it's very good to have you here. Thank you so much for sacrificing 1 hour of your Saturday evening. And John always begins his show by asking, how did you become the person you are today? So off you go. Daar gaat jy.
Okay, so my critical thought actually started after the change in government in South Africa. We had a conference in Stellenbosch and the Old Testament conference. And during that conference, I delivered a paper on the book of Jonah. And seeing that there was a changeover in South Africa, I tried to sensitize my church to the fact that at this moment we should not discuss issues like whether Jonah was really swallowed by a fish. What we should discuss at that stage, it was 1996, is what is the relationship between Christianity and the other religions. So it was not, or there was a lot of brouhaha about this paper because it was reported in a newspaper in the Cape. And then people started responding to my paper, and eventually it led to groups, or I established different groups, discussions groups at my own home. And later on, we eventually established the New Reformation Network in Afrikaans, actually in Afrikaans, Nuwe Hervorming Netwerk, but we are bilingual. We invite critical thinkers to come and deliver a paper. At first, we met at least twice a month. These days, we only meet once a month. But yeah, that's where it all started. So it has to do with my reading of the Bible, which made me sensitive to the fact that the Bible do not always really support church doctrines. And that eventually led me to questioning the doctrines of the church.
Which church was this, Sakkie?
It is also a Reformed church. There are 3 Reformed churches, Afrikaans-speaking Reformed churches in South Africa, and it's rather difficult to explain this to English-speaking people.
You can't get too much reform, can you?
Say again?
I said you can't get too much reform, can you?
Yeah, well, being in the Reformed tradition, you can expect as soon as you start criticizing or questioning church doctrines that people will come for you and try to get you out of the church, which eventually happened with me. I eventually got out of church, just resigned as a member, and eventually became a non-Christian believer, whatever you can call me these days.
A heretic. Would you, in certain circles, I do know that you will be definitely seen as a heretic. So. Yes,
there are people who would call me a heretic, and I'm not scared of being labeled that way. You said that I should mention perhaps a book or books that influenced me, and while I was becoming more involved in critical thinking about the Bible, one of my friends said to me that I should read what Lloyd Gearing from New Zealand is writing. Now, interesting, Lloyd Gearing started as an Old Testament scholar in the same way that I started my academic career as an Old Testament scholar. And he eventually became a professor in religious studies and questioned quite a number of the doctrines of the, you can say, the Reformed churches in New Zealand. So in a way, I see myself as more or less a kind of Lloyd Gearing in South Africa. An ultimate scholar. Say again, John?
Well, okay, I don't know Lloyd Gearing, I'm afraid, although I've got relatives in New Zealand and I have been there a couple of times. But I'm interested because you've really done a polar swing, haven't you, from being so thoroughly Christian that you lectured it. You lectured on the Old Testament, and now you have chucked the whole thing. So a couple of questions. What was it finally upset your belief system, and why did it take so long?
Well, you see, I grew up in a church environment, rather conservative Afrikaans speaking environment.
Yes.
Same as Tasha. But starting to read the Bible and studying the Bible, I became aware of the fact that the Bible does not support all the doctrines of the church.
No.
I eventually gave my inaugural lecture at the University of South Africa on Genesis 1, 2, 3, and the whole
Yes.
issue of the so-called original sin, to show that
Yes.
the way that the church read these chapters totally wrong. And we are, or the churches are only following Augustine's
Yes.
interpretation.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for.
Yes. Yes. Well, Genesis 1 and 2 are in complete disagreement, aren't they? So
It's two different creation narratives.
Yes.
And chapter 2 to 3 has nothing to do with a so-called fall from grace. If you read those chapters, the word sin does not even appear in those chapters,
Yes.
and it has to do with the fact that it's a little bit of a story. Why are people quite wise or has wisdom, but they do not live forever like the gods? The gods are also wise, but they live forever. But why are humans wise, but do they not live forever? And if you read that story, you will see the snake actually introduced them to the tree of knowledge and not the tree of life. It's only towards the end of that story that you see there was another tree in the center of the garden, the tree of life, and then the couple is banned from the garden so that they could not lay their hand on the fruits of the tree of life, because then they would have become divine. So that was a little story of people thinking about themselves as human beings. What are we? Why do we possess knowledge? Why do we not live forever? Why do humans, why do humans die? Why do female experience birth pains when giving birth, etc., etc.? So it's a different type of creation story.
Can I just, John? Sorry, before you
go ahead.
I want to ask two things. So, or maybe the first is a comment. When I deconverted, the Bible was instrumental in my deconversion, and it started when I read the Bible like I read the. So I have an honors degree in English literature, and when I started to read the Bible the same way I read Jane Austen and any other work of even historical fiction, things began to change for me. And when I read the Old Testament, when I read Genesis, I remember it was actually my brother and I were a little bit naughty because we sort of deconverted at the same time. And he's 15 years my junior. And I was reading Genesis again, because I started this project of sort of taking the Bible right from the beginning. And I was struck by that part where Adam names the animals. I want to hear your opinion on this, because in the Afrikaans translation, the way, if I take the text as face value, the way it's translated into Afrikaans, and in English it has the same impression in my mind, where Adam named God brings all the animals. This is before Eve is created. I'm not sure if this is Genesis 2 or 3 or 1. So Sakkie, you're an expert here. But so God brings all the animals and Adam has to name them. But also there's a line that says, and Adam did not find a partner, a mate, amongst all animals. And I looked at my brother and I said, what the hell does this mean? So Adam tried the flamingo and then the penguin and the wolf. And it's not a good fit, And then God said, okay, it's not a shame. Poor Adam, there's nobody for him. fits him. And then God created Eve. So that's the one version. The other version, of course, that they were created simultaneously out of Earth, if I'm not mistaken. So that's the first thing I would like you to comment on. Then the second thing I'd like you to comment on is the idea of sin and the Old Testament. So many liberal Christians will say, yes, but the Old Testament is old and the New Testament sort of replaces the Old Testament. So the New Testament has different significance. I often hear that, and apologists will say that. But the trouble is, especially if you accept the doctrine of salvation, without the events in the garden,
there's no need for it.
There's no need for it. And that means that Genesis is actually of cardinal importance in Christian doctrine. So I'd like you to touch on those two things. First, let's be a little bit naughty, and I'd like to hear what you as an Old Testament scholar say about Adam trying out the animals for a partner. And then on a more serious note, the other thing.
I'm wondering if he found a goat reasonably close.
Tasha, first of all, to read the Bible as ordinary literature actually informed my critical views as well. Because if you read the Bible as literature, then you discover that what Christians teach or what ministers preach in their sermons do not always relate to what you have in the text. For example, I want to go a little bit further than the question that you asked. For example, if you read Genesis 2 and 3, after the couple ate from the tree of knowledge, they discover that they are naked. So, but then suddenly they try to make themselves clothes from, they say, fig leaves. That's how it is translated. But then God comes into the garden and they hide from him. And he starts questioning them, where are you? Where are you? Why are you afraid of me? Whatever. And then they say, well, we discovered that we are naked. So how do they know that they were naked? Or who is the one that is dressed in the garden? It is God. God is, yes, he's walking around dressed. And he's a good tailor, because suddenly he makes the couple clothes of skin. So he should have had these skins ready in the garden. So you see, if you start reading these stories with a questioning mind, you discover that normally Christians do not pay attention to the detail in the text. They know.
Sakkie, I have to ask you this. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to ask before I forget. What is the translation of the fig leaves? I mean, you know the original language, so because fig leaves are hairy and really, I can just what is, if you can, what is the original word more like? If you can.
I cannot ask you because I don't have the Hebrew Bible in front of me, and to quote it from my head, I can't remember. But it's a way. It's the same as the fact that they say the forbidden fruit was an apple. We don't know what the forbidden fruit really was. It's just stated it is forbidden fruit, but it became an apple along the tradition.
Yes.
Sorry, I interrupted you in your line of thought when you were talking about the stories and the literal interpretation, and that Christians just sort of, and I did that myself. I mean, we just go directly over.
They've both frozen.
Are we back? Are we back?
We're back. We're back.
Okay.
Yes.
So Christians, and I'm not saying this in any form as criticism, because I did that for the first 40 years of my life. We sort of just gloss over this internal inconsistencies in the text and go straight to the doctrine. But the doctrine we end up with depends on the denomination that we grew up in. And I mean, you know that there's about 30,000 different variations of that.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So I'd like to come in here because there's so many questions, isn't there? I mean, for a start, why were they ashamed of being naked? Surely all the creatures were naked. What's wrong with it? And
yeah, you see, it's strange. It is a strange story, but not only strange because it is a story created by people who lived in the ancient Near East,
yes.
a different kind of culture that we live in. And the translation of the Bible, what we do with the translation is we bring that ancient text directly to our day and age, and then we lose the actually the cultural detail of the text, and we do not always understand these stories because we do not understand that culture.
Being so culturally founded makes it so obvious that it's a man-made tale. Surely, I mean, it puzzles me why. Because I read the Bible like a fairy tale. You know, it's very parallel to Grimm's or Hans Christian Andersen. And I wonder why, you know, the story of Red Riding Hood and the Wolf never spawned a religion. Why not?
Because there was already... John, I just have to say, it's really... You're very uncultured if you say that the Bible reads like the Brothers Grimm stories. I would venture to say it's much more like Homer and the Greek myths. I would draw the parallel there, because by the time that I would go further back in my mythology than the Brothers Grimm.
I don't know, because the Grimm brothers were quite horrifying and spooky, weren't they? And the Bible fits into that mold.
Well, if I can try to answer that, is I think, or if we ask the question, where do religion or religions come from? What's the function of religion? Then you see that the function of religion is to keep a group together. We tell stories to relate to that and to feel at home in our family and broader society.
Yes.
So we need stories. I'm fond of telling people that actually we live within stories. We cannot live without stories. We need stories to make sense of life.
Yes.
And
yes. We are a story, aren't we? We have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So we are a story. Each one of us has a life story. But most of us can realize the difference between stories and reality. And although we enjoy them because they're art, aren't they? They're entertainment. And we can sit round the campfire and tell each other stories and listen to it. We don't actually consider them to be factual.
The other
but
go ahead, Sakkie.
Yeah. No. You see, if you study the development of religions, you will eventually find that when empires also need a story to keep people together, and that is what happened with Christianity. Christianity was used by the Roman Empire as a kind of support to create unity within the empire, and that is what Christianity have been doing all along. It associates itself with the mighty uh, and do not really assist people in finding meaning. It's rather a way of keeping people together. It's a kind of ideology. Even you can even classify it as a kind of ideology, keeping people together within a bigger society.
Yes, and in fact, the Western Europeans took the Bible to the colonies and infected the locals there with it. It's a very powerful colonization tool. It's cheaper than bullets, and in fact, people will pay you to to preach it.
I want to hear your opinion about this idea of stories that fascinates me, and how stories keep people together. And you said something just now. You said that the Bible doesn't help people to create or to use stories to make sense of things. And I never ever want to disdain the ideas of stories and mythologies, because, as you say, not only does it keep people together, it becomes part of our collective and individual identity. But the trouble with the Bible is that and any other story that you make absolute is the moment that story becomes doctrine, you close and you forbid all other stories. And that means that the function of storytelling is then actually paradoxically lost by taking one story and making that the ideology and the doctrine. Because
that's the point. And that's why when people start to criticize the doctrine they were brought up in, they realize it's flawed, and they need to start up a new doctrine. And that's how we got 30,000 different denominations of Christianity. So why haven't you done that, Sakkie? Here's your chance.
He's trying. He's doing his best with the new Waterman, you know.
Yes.
He's doing.
Yes. Because I had a friend.
But yeah. Well, I took actually leave of the traditional Christian doctrines, whatever. I know I once was invited to a group to share my views as well, and afterwards they said, "Okay, now what is Sakkie? Is he an agnostic, or is he an atheist, or whatever?" And I said, "No, I don't want to be labeled. I'm merely a realist. I understand why we need stories. I understand where religion comes from. I would like to promote storytelling, but not to enforce a specific type of interpretation. You see, the church usually say this is the only interpretation that are allowed in the church, and no other interpretation are acceptable.
Yes.
Of course, and we should rather say open up the whole discussion about the Bible, and so any interpretation of the Bible is okay as long as you promote the well-being of people, and as long as you do not offend people, then any interpretation is welcome. But you see, I just read today in the newspaper that the denomination that I belong to will have their general synod from the 15th of October. And one of the issues that they will be discussing is whether gay people are acceptable within the church. And they used Bible verses to convince people that God does not really, or that gay people are sinners, and God are not, or they are not acceptable to God. Now, to me, to use the Bible in that way is to continue the kind of interpretation that we had during the apartheid era.
Or
The
even,
apartheid era,
yes,
during the apartheid era, they used the Bible in a certain way and say, the way we are reading the Bible tells us that the different races or colored people should be kept separate.
yes,
And verses were used. Now they just continue this kind of
yes,
reasoning.
yes,
No one realized that we are in a different country, that there was a changeover, that we cannot
yes,
read the Bible as we read it
right, yes,
in previous centuries.
yes, yes. But that's happened repeatedly throughout history, hasn't it? I mean, the persecutions, the Spanish invasions, this has been going on, and using the Bible to justify whatever particular atrocity they want to pursue, including slavery, has been
Yeah.
it's been a tactic, a strategy since forever.
Can I'd like to hear your opinion, Sakkie, on my thoughts about the Bible and interpreting the Bible. And I think I understand what you say when you say that anybody should be free to interpret the Bible in whichever way they can, and anybody can do that. I mean, the Bible is especially certain passages are so vague that you can really, it's like the Nostradamus
Mm,
predictions. But
mm,
the trouble that I have with the Bible is that people it any way they want to. The moment you say that this book comes directly from God, it's the inspired word of God, in that
Yeah.
moment you've crossed a line. Because and that to me is the problem with the Bible. I mean, anybody can interpret any text any way they want to, but the moment you cross that line and say, but this text is not a human text, this is created by God, then you've opened up a whole new can of worms. And that is where I think people like you and I have to come to a crossroads where we have to say, it can't be a little bit of both. I mean, well, in my opinion, I don't think it's possible to say God inspired the Bible, but it's so open for interpretation that God's own children who read the Bible fight with one another about different textual interpretations. Then how can it have been written by a perfect God? And that brings one to the crossroads where one has to say either the Bible is inspired, written by God, or it's not. And the moment you say it's not, then what happens to the God that's so-called inspired it? That's the conundrum that I ended up with. What's your response to that?
Yes, well, I try to convince people that the Bible is an ordinary book. It did not fall from heaven. It is not an inspired text.
mm,
It's books that was written by people living in a different environment than the one that we are living in. It's an old book, so you can still read it, but we should not treat it as if it comes directly from God. You see, James Barr, I think perhaps John might remember the name because he was a great Old Testament scholar in Britain, James Barr, and he wrote a book, The Bible in the Modern World, where he says that we should not use the phrase, the Bible is the word of God. We should
mm,
rather say, the Bible is the word of some ancient Israelites.
mm,
And if you come to the New Testament, the Bible or the biblical books were written by some followers of Jesus. It's not
mm.
something that God came from God.
Right.
I actually wrote quite a number of articles where I try to um, convince people that we cannot use the Bible as it has been used in the past. it
Right.
only creates havoc in
Yes.
society.
Yes.
And so I don't know whether I've been successful, but at least I can see that there are a number of people accepting this. We are not a big group in South Africa that has this critical input in our society. The churches grow day by day,
Yes. Yes.
but I think that we should keep on conveying this message that the Bible is an ordinary human book,
Yes. Yes.
and it should be read as ordinary literature and never be used to condemn people or to harm people or whatever.
I applaud that very wholeheartedly. So, when you were teaching biblical Old Testament lectures, syllabus, whatever the courses that you were delivering, were you treating it sort of dispassionately and just giving the text and various possible interpretations of it, or were you using it as a vehicle to impose a Christian sect on your audience?
John, I may just make a correction on the advertisement that you were sending out. You said that I was a lecturer at the University of Pretoria. I was a lecturer at the University of South Africa, which is located in Pretoria. There are two universities in Pretoria. Yes, the University of Pretoria and the University of South Africa. Now, the University of Pretoria is their theological faculty is linked to two Reformed churches. But UNISA, our theological faculty, was never linked to a specific denomination. We were interdenominational.
Gotcha.
We had Catholics as lecturers, Baptists, Reformed, whatever.
Right.
And when I taught the Bible, I always and I can say that from all my colleagues that we try to teach the students to read the Bible critically, and also not to use the Bible as a weapon,
right,
to demonize other people.
Good.
Yes. I have a very important question. I want to ask you whether you think, Sakkie, it's possible for any critical academic scholar of the Bible, Old or New Testament, to remain a conservative Christian of the stripe that you and I grew up being preached to in our church denominations. Do you think it's at all possible, with the knowledge that one has, that one can? So, it's something that's been bugging me for many years. How does one hold those two ideas in one's head simultaneously? Is it possible as an academic student?
Yeah, it is very difficult, Tertia. And if you will remember, there were a number of, we can almost call it heresy cases here in Pretoria. Some of my colleagues, Old Testament and even New Testament colleagues from the University of Pretoria, who wrote critical books, critical about even the teaching of the church. They were soon accused of heresy, and time and again it pops up in the different Reformed churches. That is why I eventually decided to call it a day and to leave the church, because time and again you are being accused of not teaching along the lines of the church. You are not teaching the doctrines of the church.
Yes.
And to me, as a scholar, you should be able to criticize, even to criticize the traditional doctrines. We cannot believe anymore in the idea of original sin. If you after Darwin, we cannot adhere to that kind of doctrine anymore. So if you want to be a Christian, you need to reflect on that and to start rethinking what is it to be a Christian. Should you still believe in this old kind of doctrines in our day and age, or should we rather say, let's take leave and almost start all over again? That's why we have called it a new Reformation, but we were not successful, and we actually decided rather we should actually take leave of that kind of name for our society.
Yes. So when you were doing this, and you were doing it in a scholarly, academic, open-minded way, but not to the satisfaction of the churches, you were pointing out the difference between having a truly open mind, a critical thinking, challenging of ideas type of mind, and the sort of narrow mind that the doctrinaire, dogmatic types want to pursue. Why is there this association between doctrine and dogma? Why do the people who like to assert that they know best and that their God is the one and that you must follow my instructions, why do those people congregate around a religion?
Yeah, John, I wish I had the answer to that question, but yeah, it's to me mind-boggling that people can become so indoctrinated that they cannot accept that other people can think otherwise, or that they can leave Christianity and live a meaningful life, and even a happy life. Yeah, it's and in South Africa, it's very difficult, especially among Afrikaans-speaking people, because people still believe if you want to be a true Afrikaner, you need to accept the Christian religion as Calvin and Luther taught it, and you should honor your traditions and whatever. So it is very difficult, I think, especially in Afrikaans-speaking circles, to just turn your back on the churches and the church doctrine and say, I'm leaving church and I'm going to live a life free of doctrines, and I want to be a human being who accepts all other human beings as my fellow human beings.
Sakkie,
I would say becoming humanist. I find, or it's difficult. You see, even the name humanist is like a swear word in Afrikaans. If you say I'm a humanist, they will immediately come down on you and say, yeah.
So Sakkie, I just want to say, if you think that you did not succeed with your Nuwe Hervorming, the new Reformation, I think it's sometimes not so easy to measure the success of these types of movements. You know, it took the better part of 100 years to fight apartheid. If you see how long it took to get rid of slavery in the United States, the most worthy causes often take the longest and so you certainly have achieved a lot. My own parents deconverted after the age of 65, and I converted at the age of 40. Many of my friends, have at least considered the ideas that I express, and an organization like the New Reformation has contributed to creating a safe space for people like me, who's a middle class Afrikaans speaking Afrikaner gereformeerde meisie. You have given us a safe space to land, and you certainly have achieved more than you perhaps realize. But I want to, in the last 15 or 10 minutes or so, I just want to do two things. One, a rapid fire, if you could, if I can put you on the spot. I didn't discuss this with John. John and I never discuss anything that happens in our program. Things just sort of, it's a little bit like creation, you know, it's very organic. And we hopefully we don't put people to sleep, neither men nor women, and we don't
Well,
use any rules.
before you take over the rest of the show, there's one comment that I want to make to Sakkie. Do you want me to do it now, or do you want to let me in later?
Well, I will let you in again later, but you can go ahead now too, host.
Thank you. Okay, well, what you have reminded me of, Sakkie, is a professor of Bible studies. I think that's her title, here in the University of Exeter, which is 150 miles that way from where I am. And it's Francesca Stavrakopoulou. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's you have? Yes. She's a kindred spirit to you, I think.
Yeah. Now, I read a recent book, what is it called? The Body of God, or something like that.
Anatomy.
Yeah, Anatomy of God. Yes, you see, if you, I enjoy when people publish these kind of books, trying to show ordinary readers that if you read the Bible critically, you find rather strange facts, which we normally do not hear about, or people do not discuss that, because the Bible is seen as such a holy book that you cannot make jokes about the Bible or whatever. But the Bible is full of humor itself. If you read the story of Jonah, it's actually a humorous little story. And there are more stories which you can read as a kind of humorous story, criticizing, even satirical stories in the Bible, if you read it as literature. And yeah, I do know that book of Stavrakopoulou. I also struggle to pronounce the name.
Greek names, eh?
So
Yeah.
Sakkie, on the topic of the humor, I would venture to say that one of the problems with the Bible is the fact that so few people can read it in the original language. So I can only speak 2 languages, and I can say about 20 words in modern Greek, and I know that there are certain expressions that can only make sense in Afrikaans. You cannot translate them, and there are other expressions. I mean, in Greek, I spent a year in Greece as a young girl doing looking after children, and to this very day, 30 years later, you can't say that in English nor in Afrikaans. It means, come on, child, what are you doing? And it just, you can't convey that in any of the other languages that I can speak. And I think that's a massive problem with the Bible. And that is something that I wanted to ask you about. Were you ever involved in any Bible translation projects? Because, I mean, that's a whole topic on its own, Bible translation. Just we have about 10 minutes left, and I really want to do a rapid fire where you just say yes or no if you're willing to do that. So were you involved with Bible translation in any way?
No, I was regarded as a heretic, so I was never invited to take part.
That is sorry, I just want to, that is so interesting, because you have just proven something to me. I've always wondered about this whole thing about translation and translating the Bible, and, well, translating any book for that matter. I mean, to translate Jane Austen, to translate Persuasion into Afrikaans, my translation and your translation will be totally different, and that's why somebody like the acclaimed South African Afrikaans author Andre Brink, he used to write he did his own translation of his own books. In fact, he would write the book sometimes first in English and sometimes first in Afrikaans, and then he would rewrite it himself. And I think I'm not against translating. I mean, obviously, I love that I'm able to read books from other languages in Afrikaans, but something is always lost in translation. I think it's inevitable, and you will be able to confirm that to me. I'm sure.
Yeah, well, I may say the following, that my first critical question while studying at the University of Stellenbosch, Greek and Hebrew, was to my Greek professor. I asked him, if someone who is not a Christian translated the Greek Bible, would his translation be the same as people who are ordained ministers? and he never answered my question. But then I realized that if you did not grow up in this tradition, you would not translate the Bible, because normally people try to translate according to the doctrines or in line of the tradition. But as soon as you take leave of that tradition, you start discovering that there are other ways of translating this text, and the texts do not always support the doctrines.
But you know, when it comes to translation, even if one tries to be objective, to translate as a modern person a book that is 500 years, I mean, for me to translate Jane Austen without even knowing everything I know about the 17th century, there's so much that I will not have the insight. No matter how hard I try, I think it's like true objectivity is not possible, because we are so fixed within our time frame. I don't think we can be objective, but I want to, in the last, you've answered many questions for me. Thank you so much. So John, I know you're not very into Christianity, but as for me, I've always wondered about this, and it was very insightful that Sakkie said he was never invited. He was never invited to be part of the translation committees. But Sakkie, just there's an idea for you before you die.
That's because it's really political. What we're talking about here is propaganda and getting the message across. And if he wasn't regarded by the others as being sound, one of them, he wouldn't have been invited. Of course not.
But Sakkie, would you please begin working on a sort of the most objective, non-religious translation of Genesis? I'd love to just read that part where they discover that they're naked and they're trying to put these fig leaves together. I'm sure there must be something good hidden in there. So would you please start working as a special request on a more honest translation of Genesis, just for the Free Thought Hour audience? Maybe if we can put it out. How about that? So you can answer that later. But I want to ask, was Abraham a real person?
No.
Moses?
No.
John, I'm not asking you. You are not the expert.
Francesca says no to Moses as well.
Sakkie, do you agree, Francesca?
Yeah.
Noah. What about Noah?
No, it's stories. It's story characters. You can even say that of God. God is a story character in the Bible. And if you read the different books, you will see that the different God characters differs. The God character of Genesis 1 is not the same as the God character of Genesis 2 and 3. The God character in Genesis 1 is aloof. He just say, let there be light, and then there's light. The God character in Genesis 2 and 3 walks around in the garden and he discusses with the humans and
he seems he
Yes.
is he the one who makes them clothes?
yeah.
Which one? I mean, I haven't read Francesca Stavrakopoulos' book, but I've watched a number of discussions with her. I've listened to a few podcasts. Which God is that has the really, really, really...
Oh, I think you might have broken.
Oh dear,
Yes,
I broke.
I did not hear the last.
Yes.
He's going to make me repeat that. So I'm asking, I've read Francesca, I haven't read the books, but I've listened to discussions. Which God in the Old Testament is it that has is it Genesis 1, 2, or 3 that has the really, really large penis?
You were better off before you heard that last word.
I didn't. There's nothing about that in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. I think it's later in the Hebrew Bible that you might find that. I know that Stavrakopoulos she wrote about that, but
Yes.
I can't remember where she got that evidence from. I'm still looking where she got that evidence from.
Yeah, she had a big bit about penises, didn't she? Yeah. So this gives me an opportunity for a joke. I don't know whether it's going to cross the language barrier, but here goes. Viagra won't make you into James Bond, but it may make you Roger Moore.
I'll remember that one. You all know what a jolly good rogering is. Well, so I want to. Oh no, it just slipped my mind. This whole thing of a joke. I wanted to tell a joke about Afrikaners. That I did see that we have some Afrikaans, some people watching, and I hope that any Afrikaans speakers will be joining us in the future. So there's this joke, John, that if 3 Afrikaners get stranded on a desert island, Sakkie, you probably know this one. So the Afrikaner is immigrant stock, and I think the most hardy and strong-willed and stubborn of all the races, the Dutch, the Germans, the English, their blood courses through our veins. So if 3 Afrikaners get stranded on a desert island, what will they do? They'll begin 3 churches, 3 different denominations. Something like that.
Yeah.
And 3 different political parties as well.
Yes, probably. Yes. Well, you've just got slightly over a minute to tell us who's coming next week, Tercia, because it's another of your guests, isn't it?
Yes. So Sakkie, please join us next week as a member of the audience, because next week I have a very special guest. So this goes way back into my youth. My very best school friend when I was 6 years old. Her little brother is today a professor at the University of Johannesburg, and he's a professor in tourism geography. His name is Gijsbert, as in the Dutch Gijsbert Hogendoren. High thorn. You know that means the high thorn. So he's a Hogendoren. That's what the Dutch means. It's a Dutch surname, and it's going to be such an honor for me to have the younger brother of my very best childhood friend as a guest on Free Thought Hour. I'm so much looking forward to this, and I have no idea what a tourism geographer does. He's just published a very good paper that I've read about, and we want to hear. So we're going to shift the story a little bit to how we relate to nature, but religion will come up, because I don't think one can exist in South Africa in this society without touching upon it. And as we all know, one's worldview also touches upon how we engage with the environment and nature. And it's
Yes.
something that it's a topic, by the way, John, that the Nuwe Hervorming has addressed in many of their meetings. And I would just like to invite Afrikaans and English-speaking viewers to visit the website. There are some brilliant articles in English and in Afrikaans. It's not an Afrikaans-only organization. And on that note, before John gives me shuts me up completely, I will say goodbye, Sakkie. It was fantastic to have you. Maybe we can do it again and we can talk about Genesis and all the rogerings that happen in Genesis.
Okay.
Sakkie,
Thank you, John.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
viewers. And thank you, future viewers. Say bye-bye.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.